So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our European Reformation District 59 webinar. I'm going to be your host, and with me I have Morag Mathieson, the chair for the European Reformation Committee. We will explain you everything you need to know about the Reformation Committee. At the end, we'll have time for questions and answers, and all the questions that might be left for answer, we will answer afterwards. So I passed my microphone to Morag. Good evening, Morag.
Good evening, Nelson, and good evening everyone else who's taken the time to join us for the call this evening. It's a chance for us here to present to you the report of the Reformation Committee that was shared with district leaders on the 6th of February. And just in case you're not familiar with the committee or what it's about or what it does, the Reformation Committee is a committee of district, and like all district committees, we report directly to the district directors. And we, in consultation with them, thought that we should share the work that we've been involved in, some of the thinking behind it, just to help you understand what's been going on and to have the chance to think about the process of Reformation and the outcomes of Reformation here in continental Europe. There's also been the possibility for, since the 6th of February, to send in questions to the committee, and a number of people have taken the opportunity to do that. And we are enjoying that discussion with the people who've been sending in questions. So where did all of this start? Well, back in 2014, on the 1st of July, you may remember that District 59 was reformed to create two districts, Districts 59 and 95. And when the Reformation Committee, who did all of the analysis and research and preparation work for that Reformation, when they did their work, they foresaw that they would be creating two districts, one with 102 clubs and one with 112 clubs. But the reality was, at the point of Reformation, we had two districts, one with 184 clubs and one with 175 clubs. So very shortly after Reformation, the thought of reforming again became real for the leaders of the district at that time. And in early 2015, it became a topic for the district leaders themselves and also the district leaders in consultation with the CEO of Toastmasters, because there are two ways of entering a Reformation process. The Board of Directors can require a district to reform. Typically that would happen with 240 plus clubs, but once your district reaches a size of about 200 clubs, then there is interest shown. And of course, because of rapid growth and the sudden approaching of 200 so soon after the Reformation, we were of very special interest as a district. The second way of entering the process is that a district can request to enter the process once it has reached 200 clubs. And early in 2015, when both districts were around that 200 mark, the executive committees of both districts agreed to apply for permission to reform. And that permission was granted in August 2015. And the Board of Directors directed that Districts 59 and 95 should create a Reformation Committee together to begin the process of Reformation. At that stage, back in early 2015, after the District Executive Committee had decided to apply for permission, a working group was established, and they were looking at things like the historic growth. How had Europe been growing, and did they think that growth would continue, and if so, by how much? And what they saw was that growth was on average around 16.3% each year, and they saw this as a trend that would continue saw different percentages of growth in different countries, of course, and so that 16.3 was higher in some countries and lower in others. But they still saw strong and healthy growth. And they saw this as an opportunity to include in this process clubs in countries that were not yet part of districts, to see if they might become part of a district in the future. So in August, when the district directors, under instruction from the board, created the committee, they appointed the following people to the committee. They appointed from District 59, Agnes Ternay, Marcus Kunkel and Luis Caetano. And from District 95, Case Bros, Yaroslav Kovac and Piotr Chimko. And they asked me to chair the committee because I'm a member in District 95, but I'm a past district governor of District 59. And it has been a privilege and an honour to work with these people, very talented and experienced Toastmasters, to work with them through this process of analysis and research together in the quest of Reformation. The task that we were given by the district directors was to develop a proposal to create district structures in Europe that are in line with Toastmasters policy, sustainable, operationally manageable, and ready for implementation on 1st July 2018 if approval is given by the Board of Directors. And ultimately, the decision about Reformation is made by the Board of Directors. When we began to look at the task, there were some basic principles that we had to apply. And these principles were drawn from policy and also under instruction and discussion with district leaders. And the principles were these. Firstly, in line with policy, reformed districts are created with a minimum of 100 clubs. So any districts we created had to have at least 100 clubs. Also, we had to consider that districts are made up of clubs that are geographically close to each other. So we couldn't create a district that comprised Norway, Spain and Greece, for example. Any new district should have the potential to grow new clubs. So we were looking at the growth rates in individual countries and districts because the district mission for a district is to build new clubs and support all clubs in achieving excellence. So we had to make sure that those districts had some growth potential in them that would allow the district to deliver the district mission. We also considered that districts need to be financially stable. One of the tasks of a Reformation committee is to create forecast budgets for new districts. And we've done that for each of the districts in the proposal. And we considered it in three ways. We looked at what if there's no growth in membership whatsoever? What if we reach the expected membership growth? Or what if we reached 8%? And 8% membership growth is significant. If a district is to be President's distinguished, its membership growth should be 8%. And our district here in Europe have been President's distinguished in most of the years of their existence. So we thought that was a reasonable thing to look at as a middle ground between no growth and our expected growth. We also looked at leadership in the potential districts because we need good leaders to take things forward. We know that good leaders can be the difference between a little success and a lot of success. And we were looking at who are the people who've stepped up in leadership in these countries, who are currently involved in leadership projects, and who would be available and willing to serve in district leadership in that term 2018-19 and beyond into the future. We also had to consider that we would not split countries if at all possible. In the last Reformation, the instruction came from Toastmasters International that the district was not allowed to split countries at all. This time we were told that if we wanted to do that, there had to be absolutely compelling arguments for splitting an individual country. And the instruction from the district leaders was that they would prefer that we did not split countries if at all possible. And as I said, we were given the opportunity to connect with undistricted clubs and see if it might be possible for them to be included in the structures if they wished to do so. These clubs, as you will understand, are independent entities, and their members have the right to decide whether they will be part of this or not. So then, with that task in mind and operating with those principles, we set about work. And what work have we done? Well, this slide gives you an overview of the work that we've been involved in. The analysis work that we've done involved the validation of the growth projection, so looking again at the work of the earlier working group. And we looked at club strength. Club strength was a really interesting thing because here we could see that certain countries were very strong. For example, in Germany, the average strength of a club is 31 members, whereas if we looked at Poland, the average strength is only 22 members. So we didn't want to create districts that would be weak by having a lot of weaker clubs. And we had to be careful that we weren't piling all of the strong clubs or the strong countries together if we could avoid doing that. It also had an impact on the financial feasibility studies, and we looked at those, as I said, and in preparing the budgets, the forecast budgets for each district. And we looked, of course, in our analysis phase at leadership profiles. Once we had done all of this initial calculation and initial work, we entered into consultation with the division directors. Division directors are the elected leaders from each of the divisions, and we asked them about the countries that they were taking care of. And we were asking them to look at the growth projections we had to see if they were reasonable. And we also talked with them about the leadership situation in their division, about the cultural fit that they saw for their countries, and if they had any special requests. And it was interesting, but perhaps surprising, that the biggest single request we had was a request for diversity, if possible. Taking two large districts like we have, with the different numbers of countries and so on, and creating smaller units, that was always going to be a challenge. Another stream of work that we've been involved with is communication with the district. So in September 2015, we spoke to the district executive committees of both districts so that we could make them aware of the work that we were doing. And then again in November, we gave them an update. And in November also, both of the district conferences at the council meetings, there was a presentation about Reformation to the councils in both districts. And there was also an open Q&A session where any members who were there that were interested could come and discuss Reformation, ask questions and so on. Then in December, we put several pieces of information onto the two district websites. So each district created a Reformation area on their district website, and we gave them a number of pieces of information about Reformation and also some questions with answers that had come up in the process of the discussions with both districts. Also in December and January, we held 2 webinars. Those were by their very nature more general because at that stage we didn't have a proposal to discuss, but they were there for people to help them understand the process, or for people who had perhaps not made it to the district conferences or to the sessions that were held at District Conference. We have a stream of work that's been working with World Headquarters because the Board of Directors has the final say on the Reformation structures. And as I said, because of our growth here in Europe, we are of very special interest to the board. And during this process, we've worked closely with the CEO and some members of his staff. They have a lot of expertise to share, and they've been giving us some feedback on the work that we've been doing. And in particular, they've been very helpful to us in the work with the undistricted clubs. In December, we got down to the serious business of creating maps, and I think that was the stage that we had all been looking forward to. And I think it was probably the one thing people kept asking us in November, what does the map look like? And obviously we couldn't tell you at that stage because we wanted to complete all of our research before we began thinking about creating maps. We were very fortunate to have input into the map creation process from past Division Governor Daniel Mouquet from Belgium. Daniel has expertise from his work in this field, and he gave us some very good advice on appropriate approaches and on working in this process. After we had created the maps, then we began to test them all against the principles that I set out for you earlier. And during all of this time, we've had communication with the undistricted clubs and also been carrying out some research and analysis work countries where those clubs are. Which brings us to talk about countries. When we thought about Reformation, there were a number of countries we had to consider, and the first were the countries of District 59. There are two countries here that might surprise you. One of those is Andorra and the other is Liechtenstein. There are no clubs in either of these countries at the moment, but the boundaries of a district are described in its district administrative bylaws, and in the bylaws of District 59, the boundaries are described by the names of countries, and those boundaries include Andorra and Liechtenstein. Therefore, for the purposes of what we're doing, we have to decide where they would go, in which direction. We also then had the countries of District 95, and you will see here the 15 countries that make up District 95. The most recent countries being added there in 2015, with Ukraine and 3 Baltic states coming in. And then we had to consider countries that have clubs where those clubs are not part of a district yet. And you will see I have grouped those countries in 2 blocks. The first of those, Greece, Bulgaria and Republic of Moldova, are countries that applied for incorporation into a district in the past year. And at the district council meetings in November, the district councils agreed to apply to the Board of Directors for that incorporation to be completed on 1st July 2016. So Greece applied to join District 59, and Bulgaria and the Republic of Moldova applied to join District 95. Those applications are currently with the board, and the board is meeting this month, so hopefully we will know very soon the outcome of the board's decision. And if the board says yes, and we believe that the board will say yes, then those countries will be part of districts from 1st July 2016. In the other block of countries, we have Croatia, Slovenia, Serbia and Cyprus, all with clubs, and all have been actively involved in discussion with the committee in various ways. And that discussion is still continuing at the moment. We have reached out to Macedonia, where there is 1 club, but there has been no response to any of the communication attempts that we've made, and therefore it is unlikely at this stage now that they would be part of the proposal. Malta has a new club in the past year, and they are happy as they are, is what they tell us. They just want people to know that they're there
Morag, are you there? Morag, we cannot hear you. Can you please
That it
check?
would not be,
Yes, we can hear right now. Can you continue, please?
okay, sorry. Russia applied to join leaders from Russia contacted the leadership of District 95 in 2015 to discuss the possibility of incorporation. But because of the physical size of Russia and the small number of clubs that exist there today, the District 95 leaders advised those leaders from Russia that it would not be viable to include Russia as part of the district. In any incorporation, the district has to demonstrate viability, and a lot of that viability is an economic viability based on the membership in the country and the logistics of managing an operation there, bearing in mind that when a country is incorporated, any future club that is created in the country will automatically be part of that district. That isn't quite the end of the story for Russia. The advice they gave Russia was that they should work to create their own district, and District 95 is supporting the leaders from Russia in that. And at the recent district leader training, the area representative from Russia came to receive training alongside the area and division directors from District 95. So there is some work alongside there to support. And then finally, Turkey. The clubs in Turkey disagree about whether they should be part of a district. And for any incorporation, every club in a country has to agree. So because there is no agreement within Turkey, then they will not be included as part of any proposal. When we got into the mapping process, we generated 22 possible maps. And our approach was initially not to be so constrained by the principles that we'd set out, but rather to look at the possibilities and then to come back and test those possibilities against the principles. As you can imagine, it was quite a challenge to meet the criteria with the large number of countries we had and the possibilities that were before us. We did experiment with splitting countries, although we were told it wasn't desirable, but we looked at it as a possibility. And we looked in particular at the possibility of splitting two countries. We looked at splitting Germany and we looked at splitting France. In the consultation with the division directors, it was very clear that splitting the individual countries was not desirable. And in the efforts of splitting those countries, we were hoping maybe we could create an outcome that would be acceptable, even although the idea of splitting was undesirable. But actually we were not able to do that, to create an outcome that met all of the criteria that would have been so much better than anything else. We also considered different sizes of districts, so we played with ideas of 5, 6 or 7 districts. And as you probably know by now, we went for 6. When we tried to create 5 districts, we were ending up with districts that were really too large. And when we tried to create 7, we were ending up with a group of around 60 to 70 clubs where we just couldn't create that 70th district. We also noticed within this there were certain configurations we thought might be really great. So we looked at, for example, let's put Poland and Ukraine together to create a district that looked from a club numbers point of view perfect, and their location and work together. And then that would mean we could put the Baltic states with Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark. But then we ended up with the problem of lower strength clubs. As I said earlier, Poland has an average of 22 members per club. Ukraine has an average of only 17 members per club. So if we had done that, we would have created a district with lower strength clubs, and that would immediately have made it a financially challenged district. Revenue in a district comes from your member numbers, and the more clubs you have, typically the more costs you have. And that just wasn't going to be a reasonable option to create that as a district, and also then the challenge of putting the Baltics with the Nordics was creating a district that was really too small on its own. As I mentioned, diversity was a big request, and in this instance, no matter what we did, we were always going to be reducing diversity. If you think in District 95, going from 15 countries to however many each of the proposed new districts has, is always going to be less diverse than we have at the moment. But I would have to say possibly not less interesting, but less diverse for sure. And also we were bearing in mind the outcome of the mapping, looking at this preventing future reformations. Reformation takes up a lot of leadership time. It's also an emotional process for individuals and for clubs. Some people are just not affected by it at all, but many people are. And therefore, we were trying to see that within 2 years of Reformation, we would be managing to create districts that would be less than 200 clubs within that period, to avoid us entering future Reformation. So this next slide just was a visual image of trying to create districts that were a bit like this tree model, where they have an operational capability, a financial capability, hopefully channeled by good leadership to create sustainable districts that have the possibility of membership and club growth and also can produce distinguished clubs. And so the proposal that we came to then was to have these 6 districts that you will see colour coded on the map there, and we gave them a letter each as a way of describing them at the moment. Could we have the next slide, please, Nelson? So this next slide shows the same map, but with the detail of the configuration of which countries are where. And this was a configuration that met the principles that we were working to and that we believed would deliver the numbers that we have and we believe would function. You will notice in District E that there are 2 groups of countries. So the first group has the 4 countries that currently are part of district, and Greece and Bulgaria, who are with the Board of Directors this month. And then the second group comes from this cluster of undistricted countries who may or may not join the process. Let's look then at some of the details of the numbers. We looked at what if these districts had existed last year on the 30th of June. So at the end of the last Toastmasters year, how many clubs would have been in existence? So you can see here, for example, District C could already be in existence with over 100 clubs. And you can see that District B was almost there. Then we also looked at, based on the growth projections we had, how many clubs we would expect to exist on the 30th of June 2018, so on the eve of Reformation. And then also working forward with our projections to 2020. We also considered, what if the growth was not as high as the 12% we predict, and what if it just stays at 8%? And you may remember I said earlier, 8% growth is the number for a President's Distinguished District. So we looked at that to see where that sat within the whole scheme of things. And on the next slide, you will see the numbers for the next group of proposed districts. Excuse me. And you'll see here for District E, 2 sets of numbers because, of course, we have the possibility of incorporations of other countries. The next stage of the work that we have before us is what I want to talk about. And as you know, we've put out the draft proposal on the 6th of February, and then we have this time of socialisation of the proposal until the 19th of March. And part of the reason for limiting at 19th March is that there is a deadline by which the proposal has to be with the District Council. And so therefore any work that has to be done at the close of this open period needs to be completed in time to allow the proposal to sit with the District Council in time. So that's why we've allowed this period of around 5-6 weeks for people to see the proposal, to ask questions, and for any further discussion that needs to take place. So during this period, as you know, more information has been added to your district website. So you will find there, for example, things like the club growth number projections, a description of how the process was conducted and what the numbers are. You will also find on the district website the forecast budgets for all of those districts. And you will find there questions that people have asked and answers that we have given are being shared. That's being updated on a weekly basis. So there's a lot of information out there. If you are looking at this and thinking, I've got an idea, then during this period is a time to send that idea to the committee. I want to be quite honest with you. We are a committee reporting to district leaders, so we will do what we can, and what we can't we will have to pass to district leaders, because we're not elected to run your districts today. We're simply appointed to do this work. But if you do have an alternative proposal, then by all means put it together, put the detail around it. You can use our growth numbers on the district websites. If you think, no, I want to use different numbers, then that's great, go ahead. But please provide us with some support to understand where those numbers have come from, so that it makes us easier to understand exactly what you're proposing and the depth of work behind it and how we can look at it. What's also part of our future plan at this time is the ongoing consultation with World Headquarters. The implementation of Reformation is the transition work of how do we get from where we are at the moment to independent districts on the 1st of July 2018. And there is a set process described for creating 2 districts from 1. And World Headquarters certainly has some experience of creating 3 districts from 2, but creating more than 3 districts from 2 is unusual, and therefore we're being asked to work with them to identify a good way for this to happen. And that's work that we are really just beginning to do at the moment as a committee. That's where we are. If necessary, we will rework maps after 19th March, and also closing on 19th March will be the consultation with the undistricted clubs. They have not seen the proposal until we brought it to districts, and they have this now, and they have the opportunity for their discussion within their clubs to decide exactly what they want to do. But they will also have to work with that deadline, otherwise we cannot have them as part of the proposal that we're working on. We see this very much as a working together thing, so it's work we've been commissioned to do on behalf of the district, but it's also work that by all means send in feedback, send in comments, and as I said, if you do have an alternative proposal, there is the opportunity to send it, but send it with the supporting information that we're able to understand that and look at it. I believe that the team has done some very good work here, Honestly, it has not been easy work because there are many, many factors to consider. And we do have two big and diverse districts with many, many members out there. So it's important to us, it's always been important to us as a committee, and it's still important to us that we do the best work that we can in this process. As I said, feel free to send things to us. There are two email addresses, one set up through each district website. Both of the district websites have the same information on them. So you can look, you're welcome to look at both, but it is the same information on both district websites at the moment. And we offered these webinars this week just to present the proposal, as I said at the beginning, to present it out there so that you are aware of the work that we're doing and so on.
Well, thank you very much, Morag, for your great explanation about the Reformation process. We now opened the sessions to questions and answers. We have around 25 minutes until 9 p.m. So if you want, any of you want to ask any question to Morag, feel free to do it by unmute yourself or by using the chat box to ask your question. I have one question from Bill regarding the, why it's not Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica included. So that's the question he asked.
I think they are not excluded, Bill. It may be a colouring issue on the map.
Okay, thank you.
So if they are part of France, part of Italy, those islands, then for sure they are included in the district. It's not that they have been excluded. It may just have been a colouring artifact in the map.
Thank you, Morag. Any questions? Additional questions?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we have Frank. Frank, I can hear you. I don't know if you can put your sound a little bit louder, please.
I met all you people in Nice recently, and when I heard that Switzerland was combining with Greece, I thought that something must be wrong, and I submitted a counter proposition of 4 districts instead of 6. Was my counter proposition published yet on the district websites?
Frank, thank you for that. It has not been published. Counter propositions will not be published at this stage. As I say, it's an open time for us to receive feedback, not to put those propositions out onto the district websites at this stage.
I thought that you said questions and answers would be published.
My understanding is that your proposition, Frank, if I may say, your proposition was a proposition. It wasn't a question as such. And as I explained to you in my answer to you, I would pass your proposition to district leaders because they ultimately have to decide whether to present a second proposal to the membership or not.
Will we know about that well before the district council meeting in Luxembourg or not?
Absolutely. There is a requirement for all the information to be with the council members at least 4 weeks ahead of the council. And for you in Luxembourg, your council meeting is a week later than the District 95 council, so you will have an extra week.
Okay, could I just make a few comments on your presentation, which was excellent. Sure. You said that leadership would be easier. Well, leadership is easier with 4 districts than with 6. Have you also taken into account the increase in annual dues of 25%, which is coming in October 2016, which means that some of the clubs like Romania probably would have to pay 1 month's salary for a year's subscription? Whether the council will grow very substantially.
With regards to the dues increase, as you'll be aware, the announcement only came out this week. So as it only came out this week, we were not able to take that into our considerations at the beginning. What I will say is that, well, no, that's all I'll say.
Well, before Luxembourg, will you take this into consideration? I think that it will probably substantially reduce the increase in clubs.
This will be a topic for discussion with the committee at our next meeting.
Okay. There we are. The other thing is that I noticed that even in your proposition, particularly in your propositions for 6, it's not certain that they will even reach 100 clubs, which is the minimum, by the required date. There may be a problem that with 6, obviously you have a smaller number by district. You must have a minimum of 100, and it seems to me that it's uncertain that about 3 out of the 6 will actually reach even 100.
We believe that they will reach, based on the growth that we did in the consultation with the division directors. We believe that those numbers will be achieved.
Well, the one you gave me, which was very kind of you, where you examined my proposition, you were just at 101 for District A. Isn't that rather close?
It's still over 100. The last proposal only had 102 and 112.
It is over 100, but not very much over 100, is it?
Yeah.
And it was the same, whereas with my propositions, except for District A, everybody else would clearly be over 100, so this danger would not exist.
As I said, we believe the numbers will take us to over 100 in each of those districts.
Well, I hope that your belief will be realized. Thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you very much. So we have more questions. We have one question from Bob Moll saying that did the committee consider splitting Switzerland so that German-speaking region could be combined with Germany, given their unhappiness with the way their proposal was prevented for being voted upon the district business meeting when 95 was split in 2?
We did not consider splitting Switzerland because our driver was to preferably not split any country, but we did not consider splitting Switzerland.
Okay, any questions more, please?
Hello?
Hello? Yep.
Can you hear me? Hello again, Morag.
Hello, Alexander.
A bit of a follow-up question from our previous webinar in which I expressed my surprise that this reformation was at all necessary because it was difficult. And this comes in turn also in relation to your offer to send proposals. But for that, I think we need first to understand what's involved in the 2 areas which you mentioned, which were leadership viability and economic viability. Because it seems that, well, one of the main arguments was reduction of travel expenses. Well, I consulted with World Headquarters and they told me that above area level there are no mandatory travel requirements for any district officers or any district leaders. And the area travels are going to stay exactly the same because the areas are not changing. So I looked at the budget and the financials you published on the website. I don't exactly understand how these numbers come into existence. I mean, the travel expenses reimbursements right now are at 65% of the budget of District 59, and they somehow, I don't know how that comes to be, and then you artificially restrict them to 25% of the new distribution, but that's an artificial restriction. I mean, you can just restrict it to any number, and of course they will be reduced. And the other thing was, it keeps circulating this thing that if a district is smaller, then the travel cost will be smaller. Well, I beg to disagree, and I pointed that one at the last meeting, because, for example, nowadays, airline tickets are not especially correlated with distance. I mean, my trip to Luxembourg is going to be more expensive than a trip from Moscow to Vladivostok, for example, by a large margin. And regarding the operational viability, I still want to understand what are the activities that the district leaders has to do.
Alexander,
Yes.
I'm really sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt you. I actually cannot hear very clearly what you're saying to me, so it's making it difficult for me to deal with your question. So I'm really sorry, but the sound wasn't good.
Okay, is it better now?
A little.
Okay. Well, the thing is, to summarize it up, we have two basic routes for viability of a district, which are operational and economical. In the area of economical, the main reduction argument is trip expenses. But considering that above area level there are not mandatory trips as per world headquarters, how does one come to the conclusion that trip expenses are going to be reduced, especially considering that smaller distances in the airline industry do not imply smaller airfares?
Yeah.
And in the leadership viability, I think that's my personal impression. I am speaking from ignorance. Most of the activity is done locally by areas and divisions. So I would like to understand what activity at the district officer level doesn't scale that well with the amount of clubs we have.
I didn't quite catch the end of that. If I could just comment on the travel expense situation. When district, and on the budgeting process, district budgets, there are certain categories that a district is allowed to allocate money to, and there are percentage limits of how much you can spend per category. So for example, in travel, the category you mentioned specifically, a district is allowed to spend no more than 30% of its whole budget on travel. So in these financial feasibility and the budget forecast that you see, that's why you will see that travel in those districts is limited to within 30%. In fact, I think we put it, what would 25% look like if we took it down to 25%? And with regards what is required or not required, it is up to a district whether it reimburses, what travel it reimburses. Districts can decide. Within policy there are certain things that they're allowed to reimburse and certain things not. So they can decide. So for example, historically District 59 and 95 have paid for area director travel to do club visits. But not every district does that. So that would be a decision of leadership, how that would be allocated. In terms of requirement to travel, obviously when the district director, for example, is the presiding officer of the district council, so when the district council meets, the district director has to be there, whether the district reimburses the travel or not, and typically district doesn't reimburse that. So there are certain travels that happen because they need to happen, but whether district reimburses that travel or not is entirely up to district whether it does it and how it spends that money. And that's why you will see that.
I understand that, but the area travels are going to stay exactly the same. I mean, the main argument, one of the main arguments in the previous webinar was that this redistribution, this realignment was going to reduce and by a huge margin, by the way, the travel expenses. But I don't see how one district director traveling to 2 or 4 district councils is going to be cheaper than 6 district directors traveling to, again, 4 district councils each. I don't know how that adds up.
I don't think we've actually argued the economics of reducing cost of travel in this. I don't see that. There is naturally a reduction as a district director if you have to go to things, if there are things that you want to be there for and be with people. If your program quality director is delivering training for district leaders and has to travel, typically those costs would come down. The big argument really is about operational manageability, and I think we talked more about this on Monday evening on the call you were on, when we talked about The workload has to be manageable for a volunteer leader. We all deserve a life. Most district leaders have a full-time job, they have a family, they have friends, they have hobbies, and they have Toastmasters, and they are willing to sacrifice some of their personal time to take on the responsibility of leadership. And in return for that, they have phenomenal learning experiences. And I can only say that my own personal experience is that as a district leader, I had a wonderful leadership learning opportunity in district leadership, but it takes a lot of your personal time. So for example, if you have, as I had 13 division directors. So if I want to speak to my division directors, as I did, on a monthly basis, that's 13 calls every month. If I only have 6 divisions, that's less than half the time on that one single activity. So it's actually a workload issue. We want things to be manageable for leaders, that people are not overwhelmed, but still can benefit from the experience of leadership.
I can understand that, but here we're talking about quite a serious decision, meaning we're going to lose a lot of what many people consider is one of the best things in district conferences, as you mentioned, which is diversity. So my follow-up question to that would be, isn't a reasonable solution not to do it everything yourself, but maybe just, or not yourself, I mean, I don't want to personalize, maybe the next district leader, isn't it reasonable to have a team and delegate that part of the work? I mean, you can scale not just by dividing the organization, you can scale by increasing the team.
I'm sorry, I'm not actually able to hear all of what you're saying, Alexander. There's quite a lot of background noise coming through.
I was just saying that obviously one of the ways to scale an organization is just to split it, which we are talking about. Mm-hmm. But then another option would be just to increase the management team. I don't think, considering that the splitting will basically make us lose most of the interesting things we have in the district conferences right now, isn't that the other option one worthy of consideration? Increasing the district offices number or increasing the supporting team.
So if we increase the number of officers, then we increase the management task for someone. That's what happens. And our organisation, Alexander, if I could just come back to you and say that, you know, once a district reaches 240 clubs, and District 95 today has 245 active clubs, then it can be required, and we are being put into that process from the Board of Directors.
Well, actually, over 25% of the districts have more than 200 clubs. So, I mean, it wouldn't be something so strange either.
Well, thank you, Alexander. We have more questions and we have more 7 minutes to answer them. I have one question from Emilia. She said, what will happen if one of the new realigned districts doesn't achieve the expected growth?
If very specifically, Emilia, you mean doesn't reach the 100 club minimum, then our understanding is that because the Board of Directors will have approved the proposal, that it will still be allowed to go ahead.
Thank you. We have another question from Bob Moll. Clarification. Is your projection of club numbers for 2020 based on 8% growth? But didn't you say that our growth rates historically been closer to 16%?
Our growth projections for 2020 and for 2018 are around 12%. That's what we've gone for. Historically, it was 16%, but we thought that there may be some reduction in growth in the future, and that's the reason the number is around 11. It's between the 11 and around 11 to 12%, closer to 12.
Okay, thank you. There is also a question from Dimitrios from Greece. First question is, if Turkey's clubs have an agreement in the future to join a district, is there a provision in the draft for them to do so?
No. What they would have to do is go through the process that other countries like Italy, Romania, Finland and so on have done in the past, a process of incorporation. So they would apply to a district with which they had a physical border, and that would be their route. They would have to apply for incorporation there.
Okay, thank you, Morag. The second question is, if Albania goes forward with creating Toastmasters clubs, is there a provision?
We cannot make provision for a country where there is no chartered club, and I know that Albania has a prospect club at the moment. So if they were to be chartered before the 19th of March and applied, then we could look at that. But if it's after that, then they would also have to go through this process of incorporation that other countries have done in the past.
Okay, and his last question is, please refer to Macedonia as FYR of Macedonia as you do for Czech Republic. So it's basically to the I think, Federation. Okay.
My apologies for that. I believe that's former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia.
Yep.
So my apologies that we haven't referred to it that way in this proposal. We will correct that.
Is there any additional question anyone want to ask? We have 4 minutes until the end of our webinar. I'm looking if I missed any. Let me check. Oh, I have one for Bill. How do we do the voting process in the 2 district councils? Remember the last time in Poznan? It was very confusing.
There will be a proposal to vote on, and each council will have its own vote, and that will be how it's done.
Okay, thank you. Anyone wants to have a last question?
I think Dominique had a question. I saw Dominique had posted that he had a question.
Okay, Dominique. Let me check. Yes, Dominique says, hello, at the beginning I thought it was a good idea to have only one proposal, but now when I see that the growth is not so strong as we thought, that the numbers of unstretched clubs increased and membership growth is slow, and that the increase of fees will have an impact, for example, on dual members who help clubs. I think the committee should propose another proposal with 5 clubs with stronger and more sustainable districts. That's his comments.
As I said earlier in response to Alexander's question about had we considered the dues increase, that only came out this week, and so it's something that we will have to discuss as a committee whether there needs to be any revision of this. And also in light of what other information comes in between now and the 19th of March.
Okay. And also Alexander asked what happens if the proposal passes only in one district.
That information would be given to the Board of Directors.
So any additional questions from the present? We have until now 28 Toastmasters still in the meeting. So we have 2 minutes left. So if you have any other questions to Morag, please feel free. If not, we will consider this webinar ended, and we will have more information on our district59.org webpage. There is a webpage specifically for the Reformation, European Reformation process. You have the frequently asked questions. This video will also be there, along with the one from DC95. And the emails you see on your screen are available to ask any questions to the Reformation Committee. And once again, I thank you, your presence, and Morag for her explanation of the European Reformation process.
Thank you, Nelson, for being our host this evening, and also for taking care of the website and all of the information that goes up there.
Thank you, Morag. And thank you all. Bye. Bye-bye.